asking. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, and I apologize for our tardiness. We actually like to be on time to these things. My son Karthik came along, but his younger brother Arjun was going to be here too. And anybody who has kids knows exactly what this feeling is. Right when we just loaded up our bus, we've got the bus tour going, seat belts and car seats in, and then he just vomits all over himself. So we had poor guy. We decided to take him back to the hotel room. So thank you for your patience. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. We live in Columbus, Ohio today. But I asked my dad, my parents were both immigrants to this country, and we used to ask my dad growing up, why did you come halfway around the world, of all places, to Cincinnati, Ohio? And he said, look, my older sister's in Fort Wayne, Indiana. That was the only place where I could find a job to be nearby. That, of course, begged the question of why his sister came halfway around the world to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And it turns out that is the only U.S. state with the word India contained in the name of the state. So that's how we ended up in the American Midwest. I ended up growing up there. I went to public schools, relatively, not terribly well-off public school, 1st through 8th grade, racially diverse. Some kids who had been held back maybe a year or two ended up going to a Catholic high school to be in a place where we could pursue academic excellence. And I'll tell you one of the things that stuck with me through that upbringing. It was actually something that I learned in 2nd grade when I heard Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech for the first time. That was the speech where he said that I hope my 4 children grow up in a country where they are judged not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. I'll tell you, that dream, it stuck with me. It meant something to me because it was the dream that allowed me to go in that single generation from being the kid of Indian immigrants who came to this country with almost no money to becoming the founder of a multi-billion-dollar biotech company that I led as CEO for 7 years. When I led that company, I worked on a number of medicines. Several of them are FDA approved. 5 of them are FDA approved today. One's a therapy for kids where 100% of kids died by the age of 2 if they were born with this genetic disease. Today, a majority of those kids are able to live lives of a normal duration because of the therapy that we worked on. I worked on a drug for prostate cancer that's now approved, but I stepped down from my job as a biotech CEO to focus on a different kind of cancer. Not a biological cancer, but a cultural cancer that threatened to kill that dream that Martin Luther King had 60 years ago. That threatened to kill the dream that allowed me to achieve everything I ever had in my life. And that is what I'm going to be talking about today, is that we live in a moment where we are gripped in our country by the rise of what I'll call these secular cults in America. The first of those secular cults is this new religion that says that your identity is based on the color of your skin. That if you're black, you're inherently disadvantaged. That if you're white, you're privileged. No matter your economic background or your upbringing, your race determines who you are and what you can achieve in life. Don Lemon effectively represented that worldview to my face when I went on CNN's set last week. I don't know if some of you saw that. He said that I couldn't make an argument to him about Civil War history in the United States because I wasn't black. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of the Squad famously said the same thing when she said that we don't want any more black or brown faces that don't want to be a black or brown voice. I don't fit her description of what counts as a brown voice, but if you think about it, there's a really toxic assumption baked into that. It's that your race is no longer just about the color of your skin. It's now about the content of the views that you're allowed to have. Well, that means if you disagree with those views, that automatically makes you a racist. And there is no greater damnation in modern America than to be called a racist. So when given the choice between pledging allegiance to this new religion and being tarred with that scarlet R, everyday Americans are choosing to bend the knee. And that's what's created this new culture of fear in our country. Fear of speaking up, fear of losing your job, fear of your kids getting a bad grade in school. I'll talk more about that culture of fear, but it's not just about the racial cult. Right around the same time as we saw the rise of this cult of racial wokeism, we see the rise of a second cult in this country. It's the cult of radical gender ideology in America. This is a cult that says, on one hand, there's so many letters in the alphabet now, LGBTQIA, there's so many they just put a little plus at the end, that says on one hand, the sex of the person you're attracted to is hardwired on the day you're born. It had to be in order to count as a civil right. Yet now it says your own biological sex is completely fluid over the course of your life. See, these two things can't make sense at the same time if you're applying principles of logic. But if you're subscribing to a religious cult, maybe these two things square up. And by the way, it makes the same move as the first religion, where Peter Thiel, who spoke at the Republican National Convention nominating Trump in 2016, he's gay by any definition. He's a man who's attracted to men, but the leading LGBTQIA plus magazine said that actually Peter Thiel is not gay because he does not represent the gay voice. So you're starting to see a pattern here. Then there's the rise of a third cult right at the same time. The rise of the climate cult in America. This one has a different point it's going to make. It says that you have to abandon carbon emissions at all cost if you live in the United States. But somehow, if we release those same carbon emissions from places like China, it's perfectly okay for us to turn a blind eye. It's a cult that says that even though we're against carbon emissions, we're also against nuclear energy, which is the best known form of carbon-free energy production known to mankind. That's a longer story as to why. It's because nuclear energy might be too good at solving the alleged clean energy problem, which means they couldn't use the climate as an excuse to advance a very different agenda. So I could go on for hours about each of these, but I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm here to ask a different question. What the heck is actually going on in our country that causes us to embrace these different secular religions, these cults, at the same time? That's the real question to ask. And here's the answer. It's that we are in the middle of a national identity crisis today in America. You ask people my age, I'm 37 years old. I'm the first millennial ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. You ask people my age, what does it mean to be an American today? You get a blank stare in response. That is the problem. That is the evidence of the national vacuum, where the things that used to fill our hunger for purpose, because the thing about us, especially millennials, we're so hungry for a cause, right? We're hungry for purpose and meaning and identity at a point in our national history when the things that used to fill that void, things like faith, patriotism, hard work, family, these things have disappeared. And so that leaves a vacuum in its wake, a black hole. And what happens when you have a black hole? When that vacuum runs so deep, that is when poison begins to fill the void. Now pick your favorite poison. It almost doesn't matter what it is. Racial wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, globalism. We could go on. That's just the symptom. Right? And I think we in the conservative movement, we've been, myself included, right? We've made a habit out of playing whack-a-mole. Racial wokeism, whack that one down. Well, guess what? Climatism pops up over here. We're against that. Transgenderism, oh, wait, we've got to put out that fire right away. We're playing reactive defense. I've been doing that. I've written 3 books in the last 18 months, traveled the country, started a business called Strive to compete against BlackRock, which is foisting these agendas onto corporate America. These things are important, but if we want to solve the actual problem, we got to go upstream. We have to fill that vacuum with a vision of American national identity that runs so deep that it dilutes these woke agendas to irrelevance. That is how we actually win. See, when I look across the American landscape today, what do I see? I see us like Americans, we're like a bunch of blind bats. We're lost in a cave. Okay, how does a bat figure out where it is in that cave? It sends out a sonar signal. It bounces off something that is fixed, something that exists, something that is true, comes back and says, okay, this is where I am. Well, we're sending out those signals. We said, okay, where am I? I can't see where I am. It bounces off the two parents who brought me into this world, my family. That is true. It is real. It bounces back and tells me this is where I am. Bounces back off of my belief in a true God. Bounces back, tells me my faith in that God gives me conviction. This is where I am. Bounces off our national identity. I am a citizen of this nation, not some nebulous global citizen. I'm a citizen of the United States of America. That bounces back, tells me this is where I am. I work hard. I create things in the world that I can see, touch, feel, be proud of. That bounces back, tells me this is where I am. What's happening today in America is that we send out those signals, but now nothing comes back because those things have disappeared. So we start making up artificial pillars of truth instead. That's what's going on. We're hungry to be part of something bigger than ourselves, yet we can't even answer what it means to be an American. We suffer an epidemic of depression and anxiety and social insecurity. Why? Because we hunger to be part of that something bigger, yet instead of actually being able to speak our minds, we're told to keep it to ourselves. Why do you wonder you have kids who are addicted to TikTok instead of actually understanding what the process of discovering who you really are entails? Adolescents who go through, yes, what all of us go through in our coming of age, some level of hardship, taught to think that hardship is the same thing as victimhood. We latch onto these things because we hunger for purpose and meaning. So the question for us in the conservative movement is, can we fill that vacuum? Can we rise to the occasion, not just to criticize the woke poison, but do better, level up, and say this is what it means to be an American today? To me, what does it mean to be American? It means you believe in the ideas, the vision that set this nation into motion 250 years ago. It means you believe in ideas like merit, like the pursuit of excellence. It means you believe that, you know what, you do get ahead in this country, not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. That is why I've become the first U.S. presidential candidate in history to say that we will end race-based affirmative action in America. It is a cancer on our national soul. It is unmeritocratic. That's what it means to be American. It means you believe in ideas like the rule of law. That if you're like my parents, thank you. You get to come to this country if you're going to follow the rules, come through the front door, pay your taxes. You know, my parents, they raised 2 kids, both of us, went on to found companies that helped thousands of Americans. They taught us that you want to enter a family, you want to enter a marriage, you want to have children, that involves a sacrifice. But you can make a sacrifice if you know what you're sacrificing for. We should be open to more immigrants like them who follow the rules, but that means that we say unapologetically no to anybody whose first act of entering this country breaks the law, because that is what it means to be an American. That is not racist, that is not xenophobic, that is American. Means you believe in free speech and open debate, that you're free to speak your mind, and you are, and you are, and you are too, as long as I get to in return. That is the American bargain. That we will not use technology companies to do through the back door what government could not do through the front door under the Constitution. That's not big tech censorship. That is government tech censorship. And if they're going to use private companies in disguise, if it's state action in disguise, then the Constitution still applies, that these companies ought to be bound by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States if they're doing the dirty work of the government, because free speech is part of what it means to be an American. Okay? It means that we believe in the vision that our founders set into motion in this country with our Constitution. A radical idea, a dream that I still have as a citizen, that the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. Not this managerial bureaucracy, this cancerous 3-letter alphabet soup that actually runs the show today. That's why I've said, as U.S. president, I'm not just going to tinker around the edges and reform the administrative state. The fourth branch of government, that administrative state, is unconstitutional, and we will shut it down, starting with the U.S. Department of Education, which should have never existed in the first place. We will shut it down. And by the way, $83 billion a year spent through that agency, 25% of that could be used to put 3 armed security guards in every school across this country. Ask yourself, what's a better use of money, okay? And it's not just the Department of Education. You go down the list. Government agencies that have lost their way, from the FBI to the IRS to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to the ATF. These things cannot be reformed. You have to level them. You have to gut them and start building anew. That's what we need in Washington, D.C. Okay? If I'm the U.S. president, if you all put me there, and I can't work for the federal government for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, by the way, then none of those bureaucrats who work for me are going to work for me for more than 8 years either. We need actual term limits in the Washington, D.C. bureaucracy that actually breathes fresh lifeblood back into our government. I'll tell you this. This is a CEO's understanding of the Constitution. I'm not a politician. Never have been. And I tell you, even if you put me in the White House, I will not be one. Okay? I'm going to run the executive branch as the CEO of Article 2 of the Constitution says the executive branch of the government is run by the U.S. president. Okay? I'll teach you a little secret I learned in the private sector. If somebody works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you. It means you work for them, actually, because you're responsible for what they do without having any authority to change it. I refuse to be the fool who sits in the White House as a hollowed out husk, just as a symbol, sitting atop, pretending like you're an employee of the administrative state. And I understand the administrative state pretty deeply. I mean, I've dealt with the corrupt administrative state through the FDA to other regulatory bodies. I mean, 3-letter alphabet soup, SEC to FCC to God knows what. TSA, thousands standing around in the airports. I mean, this is really where the cancer really lies. They look at the elected officials, even the U.S. president, as this cute little inconvenience that comes along every 4 or 8 years, but I was here long before he arrived, and I'll be here long after he's gone. That's the way they look at it. That is not the vision that our framers had, and I think if we believe in our Constitution, if we believe in what it means to be an American, it is going to take a U.S. president who is an outsider, unapologetic about it, who understands the Constitution, doesn't listen to advisors, to go in there and get the job done, not just by putting Betsy DeVos or whoever else is a nice enough person on top of these agencies to tinker around, but to actually take aim and gut the thing. That's the only path forward. This is what it means to be American. Okay, and if we do these things, and I think we can, then we actually revive the strength, the fortitude, to stand up to our real threats on the global stage. And for me, at the top of the list has nothing to do with Ukraine. It is declaring independence from communist China. This is our moment to actually take that leap. That is the Declaration of Independence that my favorite president, Thomas Jefferson, would have signed if he were alive today. That is the Declaration of Independence that I will sign as our next president, because you want to know something? We are in a codependent relationship with our enemy. Okay? Codependent relationships do not end well. The only question is who ends it first. The sooner we end it, the better for us. The longer we wait, the better for them. And here's the little secret. China's in an actually weaker spot than we are. People forget this. We just are so obsessed with ourselves that we forget to look at what's going on over there. Xi Jinping shot China in the foot last year to hold on to his unprecedented third term of power. That's unprecedented in China. The zero COVID policy in China had about as much to do with COVID as our climate policies have to do with the climate, which is to say nothing at all. It is about power, dominion, control, and punishment. But he did a lot of damage over there. This is our window to nominate a president. That is why I'm in this race. I will do it. To sit across the table from Xi Jinping and say, listen up. If you do not reform, if you stop the intellectual property theft, the data theft, deputizing our companies as your pawns to do your lobbying here, unless you stop it, we're out. We're going to not only do the easy stuff, abandon the climate cult that holds us back but leaves China roaming free, we're going to go the distance. We're going to hold you accountable. financially, using every lever we have available for unleashing hell onto the world with the COVID-19 pandemic. We are going to ban the CCP from buying land in this country. We're going to ban U.S. businesses from doing business in China unless and until you reform. He's going to sit across the table. You know what he's going to do? He's going to fold because his hand is harder than ours. But the secret in geopolitics is not that different than what got me success in business, okay? You are willing to make a sacrifice, fine, then you don't have to make one at all, because strength pays off. That's what we're missing. But you have to be willing to make that sacrifice. In the short run, it might be a little less convenient if the Chinese Communist Party weren't bidding up our land prices. Maybe you can't sell your house for $1 more than you would have because the CCP wasn't at the table to buy it. Maybe it will be a little inconvenient if a business that wanted to expand operations into China faces the possibility that a U.S. president might say you can't do it until China reforms. That will involve some inconvenience in the short run. But you can make a sacrifice. As my parents taught me, you can make that sacrifice if you know what you are sacrificing for. And that is this thing we call America. That is our country. That is the vision that set this nation into motion. We have been taught for the last 10, 20 years, I grew up into it. We have been taught to celebrate our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all the ways we are really just the same as Americans, bound by that common set of ideals that set the nation into motion 250 years ago. I believe it deep in my bones, those ideals still exist. I'm running for president to revive them, to revive this commonality across these differences. We celebrate, we have a couple different shades of melanin in here. That's good. I brought one of them. My wife brought another. A couple of you brought some different ones too. Great. We're diverse, right? A couple different genders. I'm looking around here. 2 of them, to be precise. just 2. That's great. We're diverse. But I say our diversity is meaningless unless there's something greater that unites us across that diversity. Diversity is not our strength. Our strength is what unifies us across those differences, because without that, just think about it for a sec. We're just a different looking group of 2-legged higher mammals with a bunch of different shades of melanin walking some geographic space we call America, doing what our iPhones told us to do on a given day. That's what America looks like sometimes to me, but that's not the America I know. That is not the America I learned to pledge allegiance to as a kid. That is not the America that we're going to raise our kids into. Okay, that America was founded on the vision this country was born on. E pluribus unum, we say for a reason. From many, one. That is the dream that won the American Revolution. That is the dream that reunited us after the Civil War. That is the dream that won us 2 world wars and the Cold War. That is the dream that still gives hope to the free world. And if we can revive that dream over fractious group identity and grievance, then nobody in the world, not a nation, not a corporation, not a virus is going to defeat us. That is what American exceptionalism is all about. And that is what we will revive to save this great nation. With your help, we will do it. Thank you. God bless you. God bless your families. God bless the United States. Let's open this up and let's have a conversation. I look forward to it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, don't be shy. Oh, I can tell you're not going to be. That's good. You were right away and ready. Thank you.
I'm so excited about what you're doing.
Thank you.
And I just want to say you're going to have a lot of unemployment when all of these people working in, these 3-letter groups. What are you going to do with them?
Well, you know what? They're going to have to figure that out for themselves, but we're going to help them do that, okay? We're going to give them some guidance. Turns out things aren't produced by the government.
Yeah.
We actually do have a worker shortage in this country. How convenient that's going to be for us, right? We have subsidized 4-year gender studies majors in God knows where for the last several years from that toxic Department of Education without actually training people up on how to be carpenters or welders or mechanics or plumbers or builders. I actually took a tour of one of the boat manufacturers here just earlier today. I asked him the number one shortage, what are you facing? He says it's a worker shortage. It's actually the number one obstacle to GDP growth in this country. There's actually two of them. One is the U.S. energy sector, which we've put into a straitjacket because of this climate cult. But the second one is that we can't find enough people to work for a business that wants to grow. That's right here in South Carolina, about probably 30 minutes from where we are. Great tour, learned a lot, but I asked them, beautiful boats. They put out 30 new boats they make per week. It's pretty impressive. It's some 1,000-odd boats per year, 1,500 boats a year. Amazing. 265 employees doing it. I said, what could you do if you doubled that employee count? He said, well, the hardest part is not making the boats, it's actually finding the employees. And then even when they show up, you have this quiet quitting phenomenon. Well, guess what? If you have half the federal government that's out of a job, and under my watch it's going to be more like 75%, then you have some people who are going to be able to fill that gap with some training. And actually businesses like these are investing in, the government hadn't been doing it. They're actually investing in their own workforce training program, funding local vocational schools to put people back through. Some of them are older people in later stages of their career that want to actually put their skills back to use. So the reality is, though the bureaucracies are bad, it's toxic, at the level of the individual, there's still a lot of good human beings there. Okay, at the level of the individual, something that happens when you turn them into a bureaucratic machine, it sucks the humanity out of them. And they just become a cog in that wheel. But take them back out of it, you breathe the humanity and the lifeblood back into them. I think they can actually become productive members of the American workforce that actually produce things in this country. And remember, the key to economic growth is actually productivity in America, which we've forgotten. You're at zero, no, actually it's worse than zero. You're at negative productivity in Washington, D.C., because you send these people into work for an agency that shouldn't have existed. They find things to do. That's why the Department of Education foists these radical racial and gender ideologies onto our schools, is you send tens of thousands of people to work that shouldn't have had a job in the first place. They find stuff to do, and it's not going to be good. To instead rediscover the utility, the purpose, the meaning that each of those individuals can find by actually making productive contributions to our country instead of working for that toxic bureaucracy. So I think we can get a 2-for-1 out of that, and I'm excited about it. Great question. Thank you. Please. Thank you. I'll come to you next. Sorry.
Okay, this is a tough one.
I'm open to that.
All right. How do you compromise with a socialist without accepting socialism?
By not compromising. By not compromising. So I am in this race because above all, I want to actually unite our country. I do not want a national divorce. I want a national revival. But here's how you get to national unity. There's a lot of people who will say that, hey, listen, we got to compromise. Okay, hey guys, we got to go to the other side, compromise, hold hands, sing kumbaya. That's how we have one nation in the end. I reject that.
I reject it too.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Thank you. I'm a fan. I like your spirit because I share that, right? You can't get there through compromising your principles, because then what do you have left? I think the way we unite this country is by being uncompromising about the ideals that set the country into motion. Okay? We embrace the radicalism of the American ideals themselves, because you think about it. Think about those ideals I shared with you earlier. The rule of law, free speech, open debate, unbridled meritocracy, self-governance over aristocracy. Let's be really honest with ourselves. These are radical ideals. Most of human history was done the other way. Old world Europe, they would have said we're crazy over here. They thought we were. So these are radical ideals, but that's what makes America itself. That's what makes America great. And so the way we get to national unity is by embracing and owning the radicalism of who we really are. And the thing we're going to discover is that most people, not just in this room, but most of your neighbors, your classmates, your colleagues, your teammates, I think most of you think they agree with us too. You're not sure about it because you don't feel free to talk about it. But once we start talking openly again in this country, we're going to realize that most of us share the basic principles, the basic rules of the road in common. We might disagree on, corporate tax rates on a given year. Those are the details, and that's fine. But when it comes to the basic rules of the road, most people in this country are aligned on them. And I don't even see it in terms of Republicans and Democrats. Those distinctions matter less to me when you have a lot of Republicans doing crazy stuff and a lot of Democrats who don't know why they're doing what they're doing but aren't necessarily bad people. It's not even between Republicans and Democrats. It's between whether you are pro-American. Do you believe in the ideals that set this country into motion? Will you stand for them? Will you fight for them? Are you willing to make a sacrifice for them? Or are you fundamentally anti-American? Do you wish to apologize for a nation founded on those ideals? And that does exist in this country. But it's not 50% of us, it's less than 20%. And half those 20% are people younger than me who never learned those ideals in the first place. If we teach it to them, we'll bring them along with us. That's what I see in 2024. The opportunity to do in this country what Ronald Reagan did in 1980. I think we can win this election in a landslide if we make it about the ideals that birthed this country in the first place, the ideals that made America great, the ideals that make America America. That's what Reagan did in 1980. He led us out of a national identity crisis. I'll be really honest with you. My reason for being in this race is I think I am the only person in the Republican Party right now on this ticket, on this ballot, who will be able to lead a landslide election that unites this country, not by compromising, but by being uncompromising about those principles. It's a great question. Thank you, my man. Appreciate it. Gonna come back to you? Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I've been a fan of yours for a while.
Oh, I appreciate that.
So if you win, you're gonna be the commander-in-chief, right? I just retired from the Army. And yeah, because I was just tired. It wasn't the institution I grew up with. The multiple DEI, the mandatory transgender integration training we had to do. I was like, I'm pretty much spineless because I was a lowly first sergeant, so I wasn't going to change anything. That's the Pentagon. So what are you going to do to reform the institution I love? Because it wasn't what I know. Excuse me, allergies. Because it's a very veteran-heavy area. So, like I said, the DEI stuff.
Yep.
When it's 38 degrees and raining, we all suck the same. So,
Well, so I appreciate that question. And it's kind of sad to watch, actually. The institution designed to protect America, effectively indoctrinating those very people with a hatred of what America is actually all about. And it turns out young people in this country don't want to serve a country they're taught to despise. Last year, there was a 25% enrollment deficit from our targets for the U.S. military. For every 4 people we wanted to join, only 3 of them showed up. That's a big deal. And I think this is a big part of the reason why. So I don't think most people who serve in the U.S. military despise our country. That wouldn't make very much sense, because these are people who made a purposeful decision to actually serve. It's a small managerial layer at the top at the Pentagon. That's my job as commander-in-chief. It's not your job because you couldn't do it. You'd be penalized if you stood up and did it, because the military is based on a hierarchy and order of command. It's got to start from the top. Where you cleanse that managerial bureaucracy, that top layer at the Pentagon, many of whom are years disconnected from actually serving the country, but are years now of getting accustomed to wielding the strings of power. And then what do? They blow woke smoke to deflect attention away from their actual failures. You never noticed there was this leak last week? They'll talk about the leak. How about the substance of the leak? That we actually have troops on the ground in Ukraine fighting in Russia, fighting against Russian soldiers, for all we know, while we were being told that there were no troops on the ground in Ukraine. Well, then why don't we just talk about some critical race theory instead? Right? It's a deflection tactic for years of corruption in the Pentagon to say that we're just going to embrace the self-loathing of America instead, because the people who used to be critical of the U.S. military, remember this under George Bush, that used to come from the left. So it's to say they made the same move corporate America did. Right? They made the same move Wall Street did. They made the same move Silicon Valley did. Because all of them said, the old left used to come after us. You know what? If we can't beat them, we'll just join them. We'll say what we need to say to keep them at bay, so long as we get to keep the status quo intact. That's true in Silicon Valley. Censor content that the left doesn't want, that's fine, but we keep our monopoly power intact. It's true in Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street, go away. We'll do the new woke ESG stuff as long as we get to keep our assets under management. And the U.S. military, it's the same way. We get to decide whatever we feel like doing. Whoever the U.S. president may be, forget that. Doesn't matter. They're going to come and go. We have to hold on to the keys of actually how we make those decisions, how we deploy tens of thousands of U.S. troops. But yeah, we'll do some General Milley-style white rage studies. You know, General Milley, this is the kind of stuff he talks about, as long as he gets to actually do what he does with impunity in sending people to parts of the world where he told us that he wasn't sending them. That's what's going on. So what do we need? We need to cleanse that layer. They will fight, they will kick, they will strike back. It's going to take an outsider to get that job done. There is no way somebody who grew up on even some congressional committee of oversight of the armed forces, where actually the oversight runs in one direction, it's not the direction it was supposed to run, they're not going to get that job done. It's going to take somebody who's willing to gut that system, take the pain, drop the mic, and let the next guy take over. But most people who actually serve in the military, I think, would be galvanized by that change in leadership. And I'll tell you something else that we're missing in our military today. It's been a long time since our U.S. military actually was deployed to solve a problem that real Americans faced on American soil. Right? The number one job of the U.S. military is to protect Americans on American soil from those threats. Well, let me tell you about what we could do. If we're going to use our military to protect somebody else's border halfway around the world, as Commander-in-Chief, I will deploy our military on day one to secure our own southern border. That is how we actually solve the border problem. So we know we have a border crisis in this country. Think about what that does for national pride. Think about what that does for the pride of people who work in the military. To know we have an illegal immigration problem in this country. Nobody has a solution for how to actually address it. Building the wall, I mean, that's a slogan, but we didn't actually see it through to the fullest extent. Don't just build the wall. I'm all in favor of it. Use the military to secure that border. And by the way, you know what? We have this fentanyl crisis, it turns out, in this country. 200 people dying every day, at least. It's reportedly over 50,000 deaths per year. 50 times the number of people who died on 9/11, dying of Chinese-made, drug cartel imported, fentanyl, 3,000%. Okay, it's like 10 times as many people, kids, are dying of fentanyl overdoses than even died in 2020. That's a real national problem. You have a commander-in-chief that sits by and pretends like he's a passive bystander. So what I say is, if we can use the combination of our intelligence resources and military to take out al-Zawahiri, to take out bin Laden, to take out Soleimani in some other part of the world, we can absolutely use our own military to annihilate the Mexican drug cartels responsible for those deaths here on American soil. And again, I'm going to say the same thing. Thank you. That's a proper and legally justified use of the U.S. military. I'll call up the Mexican president and tell him, listen, we're going to help you. There's a Mexican election in 2024 as well, by the way. It's an important one to pay attention to. I'll call up the Mexican president, January 2025, and say, listen, we know you're captured by the Mexican drug cartels. They're your sugar daddy. There's a new daddy in town. Now, we're going to make a deal. We will help you for a small fraction of what we spent in Ukraine, tiny fraction. We will help you solve your own problem. We will help you regain your sovereignty. That's what the Mexican government has lost, actually, to the drug cartels. We will help you do it, but if you don't do it, we will come in and get the job done for you. I think he'll take the help. But if he doesn't, that's another way we can use our military to actually solve a problem. That sense of purpose that we've lost. The purpose is to protect Americans on American soil. Once we remember that purpose, that doesn't leave a lot of room for woke poison. Woke poison fills the void when an institution loses its way. That's what's happened with our U.S. military. My top job, if you put me in that office, is to be our commander-in-chief. I will restore that purpose, and the woke stuff will fall by the wayside as just a side effect. Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate that. Thank you. Please. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here and spending your time with us. You have well articulated the what we're facing, and I appreciate that, and I think most of us probably agree with basically what you're saying.
Thank you.
My question, however, is why? Why has this happened? And if we don't answer the why, we will never fix the why. So in your opinion, why have these things happened in America? What is happening to us?
Yes.
Why did this happen?
This is a deep question. This gets deeper than politics. Right? It's because of a moral vacuum in our country. If you're going to get really deep, I mean, this is just the surface level spiritual warfare, really, that's underway in our country. And I think that when you see the rise of race, gender, sexuality, climate, whatever it is, that's evidence that we're missing the real vision, right? So conservatives, I think you know, I'm going to pin the blame on this one, on the why. On the what, I'll put it on the left. But on the why, I'll actually pin it on the right. You know why? Because the left does a fine job of at least telling you this is what your identity is. This is what is true, even though it is artificial. Race, gender, sexuality, climate. That's what they say today. All we do is we point out all the ways in which we disagree with those hypocrisies. The failure of the conservative movement in this country over the last 20 years in particular is that we have failed to articulate the vision of what is true. I'll tell you what's true. The individual. Okay, that there will only ever be one you. There will never be another one. You're not some member riding a tectonic plate of group identity. There's more to you than that. The family, it is true. There are two parents, a mother and a father who brought you into this world. We will not deny that, and you will hopefully one day be able to do the same. Okay? What is true? That you're a citizen of a nation, the greatest nation founded on a set of ideals. And it is true that that is a nation built as one nation under God. In God we trust, we say at the bottom of our coins, because I'll translate that for you. That means in government we distrust. That's who we are as Americans. But it is true that it is in God we trust. Thomas Jefferson, keep coming back to him, sometimes I find. When he wrote the Declaration of Independence, the first line, right now as you read it, as we read it, say, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Actually, in the first draft, what he wrote was, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. That means something else. We have lost the sanctity and appreciation for what is sacred about this place that we call America. Sacred about us as individuals. Sacred about the family as the best known governing institution known to mankind. Sacred about this nation and sacred about God. And I think when then you have a moral vacuum, great. The rest of it is just going through the motions, one downhill slide. The question is, do we have the courage, actually? Do we have what it takes to step up and revive the truth? Right? The easy part, criticizing the hypocrisies of the other side, that's a shielding mechanism. Right? We're doing that. We stick to that just because we're scared of the true thing. You're going to get a lot of people coming through here. South Carolina, you're an early state, first in the South primary. I love it. I'm a big advocate for keeping it that way because you guys have a sense for how to vet your presidential candidates. You know, I've been in enough rooms now in this state. I know it. You guys know it when somebody walks in and gave you some plastic speech that they learned right before they walked in here, practiced with their political consultants, versus somebody who's telling you what they actually believe. You get a sense for why is it that even the Christian conservatives are so afraid to talk about God. Okay? Why is it that the supposed America First conservatives that adopted that label like yesterday don't know a thing about the actual ideals on which the nation was founded? Ask them who the three authors of the Federalist Papers were. You'll get that same blank stare I told you about the millennials. Okay? You can't just talk about the importance of our history. Let's talk about our history. That's what it's going to take. We got to level up. We're done just talking about, oh, well, we should actually talk about faith and family. How about actually standing on that foundation and living it? Okay, my son, he's probably playing in that classroom across the way. He doesn't like the long speeches very much. You guys are nicer than he is. And listen to me. I want to be able to look him in the eye and to say, I want you, whoever that president is, I want you to grow up to be like him. You don't have to answer, but be honest with yourself. When's the last time you're able to look your kid in the eye and tell them the same thing? And somebody's going to talk to you about family values. Someone's going to talk to you about God. They're just checking a box. Do we actually mean it? Because the people of this country can see through the artifice. Can we restore the truth? That's the question. You want to know why? That's why it happened. Once you answer the why, that's the first path back to the answer. But it's not going to be easy. It's going to take courage to get there. The question is, do we have the courage to deliver it? And I'll tell you, if you guys do your part, I will do mine. But that's going to take every one of us. A U.S. president alone is not going to deliver that. That's a cultural change in this country as parents, as business leaders, as teachers, as citizens. Everybody else is going to have to step up and do their part too. It's not going to be some president coming on from up on high in the White House to save the country. It doesn't work that way. If we're going to be saved, it's going to be because we save ourselves. And so we can look at the other, right, and complain about the top-down problem. It's like the Israelites, right? When they left the Pharaoh, they escaped. They thought they were set free. Moses led them out of Egypt. When they're lost in the desert, you know what they said? We want to go back and bend the knee to the Pharaoh. Right? So we can complain about the Pharaoh all we want. What we need to do is take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what is it that makes us want to bend the knee? It is that vacuum. Can we fill that vacuum? Do we have it in us? I think we do, but it's going to be up to us to actually step up and fill it. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Thank you. Well, I just want to give.
This is important.
Okay.
I'm just catching my faith now at 79. What we missed since 2000 was we made money God.
Mm-hmm.
We forgot who God is. And we purposely forget who God is all the time. We want to be God. And that's what America, the advertising, everything. So that's what, in the last 20 years, why did it happen? I mean, I'm just, the more humble you get, I guess older or sicker or whatever, but you begin to realize you need God. You can't create yourself. Mm-hmm. We get this impression that we're strong, we can do this, and we just give ourselves, money is God. I don't know what happened to you that you did not buy that message. And you didn't let money become God.
I appreciate it. I'm going to call my wife up. This is, Apurva, you want to come up here and talk about this? Because we talk about this all the time, even in raising our kids. Because, we have lived the American dream. I built a multi-billion-dollar company. My kids are now growing up in a household that is a very different one than the one that I grew up in or Apurva grew up in. So this is a question for us, even in terms of the materialism that our kids grow up in. This is a question we grapple with every day. I know Apurva has a lot of thoughts. It's a good chance for you to meet Apurva as well, but I don't know if you had any reactions to that, because this hits home for us.
First of all, thank you. What's your name?
Irene.
Irene, thank you so much. Your sound, just like you set it up, because I literally talk about this with Vivek, every other week, because we've got a 3-year-old, and I like to say this story about our older, you met him, Karthik. Thankfully, Arjun is not quite as much of a troublemaker yet, but Karthik, he is a sensitive, he's such a smart kid, and especially at 3, they start noticing things, and he used to go to sleep just fine. Now, at night, we do our bedtime, you do the bedtime story, you sing a song, you get all the toys, and that used to be that, we used to put him down. Now, he starts bawling. He says, you are going to go away, and I'm going to be all alone. And that's so hard. The first few times he said it, I was just like, well, I'm here for hours now, because I can't leave him. So you wait until he goes to sleep. But then I realized, that's how we all feel. It's scary to be in the world and think about how we are all alone. Thank God I still have my parents, but if I didn't, I would feel all alone. Thank God I have my husband, our children, our family, we feel strong. But you know what else gives us strength? Is God. And we all, I certainly went through that phase, I think Vivek also did. We went through phases when we're in high school and college, you read all these books, you learn science. I'm a doctor. You learn biology, you learn physics. You think, hey, I'm not going to be a chump. Where's God in all of this? There can't be a God. When you're learning all of this, I don't see any God here. And you start to get arrogant. And I like that word that you had about humility. And what you realize is that that is the most arrogant thing you can think, because God, there is room for God in our science. I mean, we both study biology, we've done all of the things. There is 100% room for God in our science, because science is humble. You know, people always say, oh, I trust the science. That's fine. You can trust science. Science is just a way of learning about the world. But science does not pretend to teach you about the miracle of my finding Vivek and us getting married and having children. There's no world, it can tell us the mechanics of it, but it does not tell us about how miraculous it is that they have two souls, that they are intelligent, that they can ask us these questions. Science can't pretend to answer these questions, and it's humble about that. And I think it's time for us, as people who are raising our children, who are going to think they're smarter, that they're the smartest thing that's ever happened. They're going to want us to, I'm sure, you know, already our generation dismisses people as boomers. We're going to be dismissed as millennials, old school, old fogies one day too. But we have to teach them that there is a purpose to humility. Humility is not just being, trying to be some fake and pretending like you didn't, you're trying to be fake about this. There's a real purpose to humility. It teaches us that you do not have to be responsible for everything in the world. There are things, this anxiety that we have, we just flew on a plane with my whole family. That could be crippling anxiety, everyone I love. But I trust in God, and that's all you can do at some point. And there's no science that says that there's anything wrong with that. So I think that we have not done a good job about making faith a compelling argument for faith. And I think that it has seemed like something that can be brushed under, that, oh yeah, people talk about it, it's something we're supposed to say, you take your photo shoot at the church. But for us, I mean, we're Hindu. We are. We don't look like every other person who, has their pastor. We have our priest. Our ceremonies look different. And by showing that there are so many ways to believe in God, that there is one higher power out there, but all of us call on him in different names. In some ways, I think of it as us doing our part and making it seem like a compelling thing for children of our next generation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Please.
Okay, I love everything that you said that you want to do, but my question is, we've got such a corrupt, power-hungry Congress.
Yes.
How do you get around taking away the IRS and the FBI and the Department of Education, which is just evil? How do you take them down and then build them back up without Congress destroying you?
So this is a great question, the how, okay? We talk about, I think too much in our party we talk about the who. I was talking about the what. You asked the deep question about the why, but now let's get to the nuts and bolts of the how, okay? So everybody has to be clear-eyed about what it takes to do their part. The US president, there's certain things you can do without asking anybody for permission and anybody for forgiveness. Most of my agenda, most of the things I've said today that I say on the rest of the campaign trail fall into that category. The number one mistake that most presidents make is they lead with a legislative agenda. Problem with the legislative agenda is that it requires Congress to act. I bet you it's funny how memories fade. But 8 years ago, I don't know if anybody remembers what the top legislative promise was from President Trump of something of Obama's he was going to repeal. Anybody remember this? Obamacare. There you go. Repeal and replace Obamacare. That was actually the top campaign promise, probably in sitting rooms like this one, maybe even this very room. Didn't happen. You don't know why? Because Congress had to act, and they weren't up to the task. So that's the mistake most presidents make. And then there's the stuff, by the way, the federal government shouldn't absolutely be touching. It should be left to the states and to the people, if not to government at all. That's most things, actually. So I'm focused on what the U.S. president can do. So when I say I want to get there and do, if I was to get in there and focus on doing two things, one is it is to gut the administrative state, shut down the fourth branch of government, which should have never existed, and declare independence from communist China. And the fentanyl piece is part of that anyway, because that's Chinese fentanyl. If I get in there and just get those two things done, I mean, there's a lot else I want to do. That'll automatically revive the economy. That'll automatically help revive our national pride. But I get in there to do those two things. That spawns a national revival. So how do I do those two things? Turns out shutting down government agencies does not require congressional consent. Article 2 of the Constitution says the U.S. president runs the executive branch of the government. If you duly elect me and put me in that White House, I will run the executive branch of the government. I will fire the next Anthony Fauci or James Comey or Merrick Garland and the legions of people under them, okay? I will shut down the toxic government agencies. Now they'll say that, oh no, you can't do that because Congress said that these agencies had to allocated a budget towards them. This is where it requires getting into the details a little bit. Okay, and I'm a detail-oriented guy. It's how you build businesses that succeed. I went to law school. This is the stuff that actually matters. So what happened was, it's a long story. Here's the short story. Presidents started to get lazy when the administrative state was born. So they said, hey, you guys just work out the budget with Congress. Well, the people in the deep state said this is an opportunity. So the budget requests in the language they used to write for Congress used to say, may we spend this? We may spend this. You have to ask for permission. That's what our framers wanted. They started to say, well, let's just change that a little bit. We're going to say you shall spend it. So they send that draft language to Congress. They're corrupt. They're asleep at the switch. They send it back. So let's say even a Trump wants to say, hey, I want to shut that down. Well, the deep state gets to say, no, you can't do that because Congress said you shall spend it. Well, it's not going to work that way under my White House. Under my White House, there's one executive branch of the government, not two. All budget requests run through the White House, and we will ask for permission to spend the money the way the framers actually wanted it. But if that's going to be wasteful, if that's going to result in people doing something unconstitutional that they weren't allowed to do, we're going to fire them. We're going to shut the agencies down. That's how you actually run the executive branch of the government. They'll say there's civil service protections, that you can't fire these people. Well, first of all, those are unconstitutional. As read, I will behave accordingly. Second is you have no civil service protection or a right to work for an agency that doesn't exist if you shut it down. And I bear no illusions here. They will sue me. And there will be litigation over this. And guess what? That's a good thing. It's like when I went on CNN, we joked around. They give you Don Lemon, you make lemonade out of it, okay? That's what you do when the federal government, they serve you lemons, you make your lemonade, which is actually pretty simple. We'll take that to the Supreme Court. Actually, it turns out these presidential actions go directly to the Supreme Court. They don't go up the other system. You got to know how this works. Well, then study the current Supreme Court. Here I'll give Trump credit. He made a great Supreme Court for this country. Most of them agree with my view on how the Constitution works here. So you know what that means? Is that the next president, whoever that is, can actually be the person who runs the executive branch of the government. That is how we drive change, generational change. And think about that. It's like a game of sports, like football, right? Guy throws the pass, another guy catches it, runs down the field, do the next play, hand it to the next guy to take it and get the next first down. President Trump, great job with the Supreme Court, laid the foundation. You know, once you try to drain the swamp drains you back, but that's okay. You did your part. Pass it on to the next guy. I get that done, actually finish that job in terms of gutting the administrative state itself. Can't just drain the swamp. You need to burn it, burn the ashes, and barely build something skeletal to take its place. That gets litigated at the Supreme Court. Great, the next guy gets to start with judicial precedent that says this is actually how it's done. See, it's not going to be just one of us coming from on high to save us. It is going to take all of us at the same time and across time to actually rebuild this American experiment that we've lost. That's what it's going to take. And I think we can go further if we do it based on first principles and moral authority. Back to that question. We got to reclaim principles and moral authority, not just personal vengeance and grievance. That only lets you get so far. Last president that did that well was Ronald Reagan, and that is why he led a national revival. Nobody since his era has done that well. That's the opportunity we have sitting in front of us in 2024. And you put me in that office, I'll do my part. Thank you. Appreciate that question. I'll go faster on these last few so we can get around these, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Belief in our Constitution. Steve Hassel, I served 30 years in the Air Force, retired lieutenant colonel. A lot of military people, including myself, are very concerned about the grand jury on January 6th. Vice President Pence just testified 7 hours. Did it doesn't seem like the other candidates are showing enough courage to say, well, maybe Trump really did lead the charge. What's your view? What's your view? What's your...
So I think that the prosecutorial system is corrupt in this country. It would be more convenient for me, I'll be really honest with you, much more convenient for me if Donald Trump was not in this race. You know, I'm polling about where he was when he came down the escalator, and he's polling about where Jeb Bush was at that time too, or even ahead, further ahead. So that's fine on the politics of it, but it is wrong. The fact that we are not a country that uses police force to stop its political opponents from running, that is not the America that I learned to pledge allegiance to. And it disappoints the heck out of me that there isn't another Republican candidate in this field that has the spine to stand up and actually say it. We have a corrupt administrative police state in this country. Let's recognize that for what it is. And the way we fix it is twofold. I'm normally forward-looking, okay? Shut down the agencies, build up something from scratch. But if there's an opportunity to rectify, there's rarely can you go into the past and change the past. But the president has one narrow way to do it. It is the pardon power. So I've been very clear. We have a growing list of people we will pardon in this country. It's very controversial. If there's one thing that makes the left really come for me on this, it's actually this list, but I will not back down from it because that is what justice demands. Okay, we will say, I've said that actually I would pardon President Donald Trump. If I'm elected to office, he can't actually pardon himself. It's a complicated thing. I will pardon him if I'm in office because what is happening is a politicized prosecution. In fact, I've also said I will pardon anybody who was a victim of a politicized prosecution. By definition, a prosecution that would not have been brought but for the political circumstance. If it was somebody else in a similar position, they didn't bring the case. That includes the likes of, you guys may not have heard of these people, Douglas Mackey. Okay, somebody who's facing, maybe somebody has heard of him, thank you, somebody who's facing 10 years in prison right now. It is a sad story for making a meme on the internet that made fun of Hillary Clinton supporters. And the funny part is, there's a comedian who made the exact same meme about Donald Trump supporters completely roam is free, as she should, because we live in a free country. But I will pardon Douglas Mackey. I will pardon Julian Assange, okay? This is somebody who published what was leaked to him. The Washington Post does that every day. We just selectively went after this guy, and President Obama commuted the sentence of Chelsea Manning, the actual government employee who leaked it, to Julian Assange. Does that make sense? Yeah, it does, because that person's transgender, so that gets you a pass. I'm serious. That's exactly what happened in this country. And the one that really makes people mad, but I'm going to stand by, is I will pardon any January 6th defendant who was a peaceful protester who are now being denied their due process rights. Because that's due process, right? Well, the way it works is you get access to exculpatory evidence. That's what you get. They didn't get it. That's a due process violation that merits a pardon. And I'll tell you where I'm coming from on this. This isn't partisanship to me. I was actually, some of you probably might even disagree with me on this, and that's okay. Back in the 2000s, right, when I was a college student and shortly thereafter, I was one of the weird guys who was like, the people in Guantanamo and Gitmo, if we prove they did something wrong, you hold them to the highest standard of the law, but I still felt they deserved due process. And that put me on the other side of the Bush conservatives at that point, and we had a healthy debate about it. That's where I come from. This is not about political partisanship. This is about the rule of law in the country. Like Julian Assange, I don't think he's some sort of conservative as far as I know. Doesn't matter. We have to stand on principle. And I think that's going to require fortitude. But our framers put in place a mechanism that empowers a U.S. president to carry this out. And so if you're going to put me in that office, it is my responsibility, it's my moral responsibility. And the rare thing you can go back to the past and change an injustice, you got to go back and actually exercise that power to do it. That's how I see it. Thank you for the question. What's that? I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a homeschooling mom of 5, and we're a military family, and brought some of my kids out tonight to
thank you.
So thank you. So the question I have, and first just want to say I appreciate what you feel about education, wanting to defund essentially the department and start over again because it's not cheap to homeschool, and we have other homeschooling families in here tonight that I know of, and so, I do appreciate those efforts. One concern I have, so yesterday, the high school right here in Whitewood had a pride event. They brought in people from off campus, adult people from an brought them in there, they gave them free food, they had a DJ in there, they had this whole lunchtime hour with, gay pride. And there were many parents, including myself, who expressed concern to our school board and administration about this. And unfortunately, the principal and administrators of the school decided that if they shut down the event, it would violate Title VI. Now, the way I see it is these are minors. So Title VI, I can see how that can apply to a university campus, for example, but we're talking about underage kids who actually have a Gay-Straight Alliance club on campus, which I don't understand how the administrators are able to circumnavigate age of consent laws. So I guess my question to you is, how can we fight back against this? Because this is happening all over the country. There's LGBTQ propaganda going around the schools. There are kids who are constantly exposed. Recent statistics show that the current generation, our current teens, 1 out of 4 are identifying as LGBTQ. So it's very much a social contagion that's being pushed on these kids. And yet the administrators feel like they can defend it because they feel like their hands are tied with Title VI discrimination. I don't agree with that, and so that's my question to you. How can we counter that, in your opinion?
So you've thought about this very clearly, and I think the answer is kids aren't the same as adults. So I want to stand on principled footing, because they will say that you're coming after trans rights or LGBTQ rights. I want to be very clear about where I stand on this, and everyone others can disagree. But part of living in a free country means that as an adult, you're free to wear what you want, dress how you want, marry if you want, right? I'm not saying that's the right ways to live your own life to lead yourself to happiness or not, but you're free to drink alcohol, you're free to smoke a cigarette, you're free to do whatever you need to do as an adult. That does not mean that you are free to foist that agenda onto kids using our mechanism for educating children to do it. That is a difference. So I have a broad agenda relating to protecting our children broadly. This might be a good chance to talk about that. I think that if you're an adult, you are free to actually go through a surgical procedure to change your genitalia, whatever you want to do. It's just part of a free country. But if you're a kid, I will ban genital mutilation or chemical castration or puberty blockers for kids under the age of 18 as part of gender-affirming care, because kids aren't the same as adults. And it turns out this isn't that unfamiliar. There isn't a state in this union that allows you to get a tattoo by the age of 18, because we don't want you in that case to make a body-altering change that you may later regret in life. I actually met, it's a really sad story, 2 kids, 2 young women, not kids now, they're young women. Chloe and Katie are their names, in New Hampshire, who are now regretting the decisions they made to go through a double mastectomy, cut off both their breasts when they were early teens. One of them had a hysterectomy, no uterus. She'll never have children, even though she now wants to. Went through puberty blockers. They will never be the same. They're now speaking out because they want to make sure that other kids don't make that mistake. It's not their fault. It's a culture that allowed us to do that to them. That is wrong. That is morally wrong. I feel the same way about even social media usage. This is a different topic. I think that if you're not old enough to smoke an addictive cigarette by the age of 18 or have an addictive drink of alcohol by the age of 21, you shouldn't be old enough to use an addictive social media app at the age of 13 or 14 like TikTok. This is not a partisan point. It's about protecting children. I think physical protection of children is really important. I cannot abide another school shooting in this country. You want to protect our children by putting 3 armed security guards in every school in this country. You could do that for less than a quarter of the budget of that entire Department of Education. So I think that we need to reframe this entire debate. It's not, because the left has a strategy, right? They'll say something radical, label it. Conservatives criticize that on the merits, and then they'll say you guys are culture warriors and bigots, and we never said that word in the first place, right? Woke, LGBTQI, whatever it is, ESG. Don't fall into that trap and being reactionary. We have an affirmative vision of protecting children, okay? If gender dysphoria is such a source of suffering as it is for like a rare, exceedingly rare few people ever had that condition, why on earth are we going out of our way to create more of it? Right? Ask those questions. And then say, look, we're going to treat these kids with compassion. When you say that you have a queer identity or a trans identity, often when you're a kid, that means something else has gone wrong in your life. Right? Something else is going badly more often than not. Maybe it's at home, maybe it's at school. How about actually having real compassion? Getting to the bottom of that. Figure that out. Help that kid who's crying out for help but just saying it in a different way. Affirming their confusion is not compassion, it is cruelty. And so for those reasons, because kids aren't the same as adults, I agree with you, there's no legal bar. That's a smokescreen. Standing up for actually children as different from adults is something we already do in every other sphere of our lives, smoking, drinking, tattoos, and onward. It's just that when it came to this one issue, they claimed that smokescreen of civil rights violations or libertarianism or whatever, but in fact, nobody ever accepted that kids were to be treated the same as adults in the first place, and that's why it's not a legal violation. And I'll run the Department of Justice accordingly to make sure that we're actually protecting those children to the fullest extent of the law. Thanks a lot for that question. Appreciate it. Take the last couple of questions, yeah. Tell me how we're doing on time for our team. Good.
Any ideas on addressing our bone-crushing debt?
Yes, actually. And it's a different idea than you're going to hear from the others. It's a basic solution. So you're going to hear from Democrats about raising taxes. Some Republicans are coming out on the side of cutting entitlement spending, and some of that is going to be, in the longer run, doable. But it's as though they forgot there's a third way. GDP growth in this country, economic growth. So if you take the current economic growth rates of 1-point-something% and you drag that out, it's true. We run out of money, and interest expense is going to be our greatest federal expenditure by 2028, actually right now. But if we're growing at 3+% GDP growth, we're in the black for good. In fact, we grew for most of our national history at 4+%. And so the question is, how do you restore economic growth? It's actually pretty simple. You unleash the U.S. energy sector. I'm going to say some bad words here. You drill, you frack, you burn coal. You embrace nuclear energy. Okay. Sorry for the foul language there. Hope you can handle it. You put people back to work. What does that mean? You stop paying them to stay home. It's what we've done for 60 years since Lyndon Johnson, and the last 3 years since the COVID pandemic aid. You create an epidemic of laziness in this country where human beings aren't economic automatons where somehow you take away that incentive and then they suddenly go back to work. We're humans. We have this thing called habit. Habit creates culture. We have an anti-work culture. Put people back to work by changing those incentives. And then you reform the Federal Reserve, which is an institution that's gone awry, trying to balance inflation and unemployment, play financial God, raining money from on high like manna from heaven for 15 years, trying to engineer the financial system in a way that's actually created a lot of the financial problems we now face. You know, Federal Reserve needs to be put back in its place and say you need to restore the U.S. dollar as a unit of measurement. That's your sole job. I don't need 22,000 of you to do that. I need fewer than 2,000. 90% layoff at the Federal Reserve. Maybe they can find some of that work we were talking about earlier too. Those three things alone get us, on my math, back to 5+% GDP growth. If we get to even 3+% GDP growth, our fiscal problems are smaller. But here, this is a topic that there's no debate, or there should be no debate, that most Americans, red or blue, love GDP growth. What does that mean? It means we make more money. That's actually literally just GDP growth is a fancy way of saying we all make more money. That grows our way out of our problems. And I think that's something we can come to rapid political consensus around as long as we can get over the climate cult, the anti-work culture, and the bureaucratic class that runs the Federal Reserve. Leave that part to me, and we'll unleash GDP growth in this country. That's the answer. Thank you. One more question. We'll stay for a little bit afterwards, too, for those who didn't get a chance to ask it publicly.
I appreciate your leadership courage and
Thank you.
your insight is clear. I think most of us in the room would know that you're genuine and authentic.
Thank you.
And we're talking a lot about what happened when you're in the White House. But between now and that, my frustration comes as a voter that we see strong business outside of politics. We see intelligence and enthusiasm, clear ideas. And then we go to the voting box, and we're voting for someone that we're having to say, well, I have to pass the immorality of his behavior, or we have to, I'm just disappointed many times. So how do you get from here to the White House? There's more of a strategic question, so that we're excited about finally being able to vote for something we can stand on.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think the good side of this is supposed to be a struggle. You want it to be a struggle. We want it to be a struggle. I can tell you 9 weeks into this isn't easy. But we should want people like me to be vetted, to be tested before I'm put in that seat to sit across that table from Xi Jinping. And I think by the end of that process, that can be tiring. It can drain the lifeblood out of you. It can cause you to make compromises that you later regret, and maybe you weren't actually the person who deserved that job. That's what this process exists to test. It's not just about two-dimensional television screens and digital ads. That's why we come here, to give people like you a chance to test us and put that through it so that you have conviction on the other side of it. Whether as a nation, whether as a voter, the path to conviction runs through doubt. Okay, so go through your version of doubt about the process, about the people. That's the path to conviction on the other side of it. I'll tell you about me. I would rather speak truth at every step of the way and lose this election than to play some political snakes and ladders and somehow win. That just feels tiring to me. I'm not even sure I could muster the strength to do it, but I really mean that. We didn't know until December. We had not thought about seriously running for president. December we decided we felt called to do this because we saw that vacuum of vision of what it means to be American. Nobody's reviving that in the way I think we can, especially given that we're part of the generation that we are, especially because we live that American dream as first-generation Americans and can speak to bringing along a country that delivers a landslide election instead of even a 50.1 victory. That's why we're in this. But this is a long process for a reason. And I'm going to ask you guys, if we take something away from this, spread that message coming out of this event tonight to 5 people in your community, to sort of give people this sense again in our country, something that we've lost, which is to say that you join me in rejecting the only bipartisan consensus that it seems like we have anymore, which is that we're a nation in decline. Okay, that we are somehow destined to be Rome. We're destined, sometimes when I'm in a bad mood, I wrote my second book, I said, no, we're not Rome. Maybe we're just Carthage. Because Rome lasted a couple thousand years. We should be so lucky. I've been through my version of doubt, by the way, about the country. I'm now on the other side of that. I'm at my place of conviction. I don't think we have to be Rome. I don't think we have to be Carthage. I think we're just a little young, actually, going through our version of adolescence, figuring out who we're really going to be when we grow up. When we view it that way, it takes a little bit of that pressure off, knowing that we have been through this before. We will go through it again. That there was not one rise and one fall of Rome. There were many rises and many falls. There were many rises and many falls of America too. And I think that when we are tested, whether it's as a presidential candidate, whether it is as a country, we are stronger because we are tested. We will encounter hardships, including between now and January 2025. Those are the choices we've made, the people we've put in charge. They are giving us the policies that ensure hardship we will have, economically and otherwise, but hardship is not the same thing as victimhood. Sometimes that hardship can be what teaches us who we really are. And once we rediscover that, who we really are, what does it mean to be American, then nobody's going to stop us. That being American means we revive that dream that says that no matter who you are or where you came from or what your skin color is, that you can achieve anything you want in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that, you know what, you're free to speak your mind at every step of the way too. That is the new American dream. It's not just about green pieces of paper. It is about conviction in our purpose as citizens. That is the new American dream that we can revive. It's going to take all of us to get there. If you do your part, I promise you, I will do mine. That's what this ball game is about. Spread the word in your community. Thank you for welcoming me to it. My name is Vivek Ramaswamy. I'm grateful to all of you. God bless you. God bless our country. God bless the United States of America. Thank you all, and we'll stay up here for some pictures. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.